Frontlines, only on 247 Niger TV.
Hello there and welcome to Frontlines on 247 Niger TV. My name is Courage Mbon. The New Oxford Dictionary defines xenophobia as a state of antipathy or aversion for strangers. Today in Frontlines, I have someone who's been to South Africa a couple of times, I'm sure more than twice. He's here with us to talk on what he thinks are the factors that would have led to this aversion, this fear for strangers. Hello, Rafael. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Courage.
Rafael, do you kill or do you confront what you're afraid of?
Well, it depends on what it is you're confronting. It depends on what is making you afraid. But then, first, let me start with your definition of xenophobia as you picked from the dictionary. I like to keep it very simple. It's irrational hatred for strangers. Functional word, they're being irrational. More often than not, you don't really have a reason to hate this person other than the fact that the person speaks a different language, or he comes from a different part of the world, or you just don't like him. You don't need to have a reason. So what's happening in South Africa is very sad. Much of the civilized world has criticized and condemned it. Even the reaction from the South African government, belated as it eventually came, turned out to be that very many South Africans, especially those who have the neutral hue, do not think it is exactly the way for whosoever the guys are to vent whatever anger they might have towards strangers. So it is sad, and if they have issues, I do not even think that killing strangers is going to solve the issue, because there are underlying factors that have nothing to do with the strangers. The Nigerians, the Mozambicans, the Zimbabweans, over 1 million of them who live in South Africa, and lots of other people who are also contributing to the economy of the country. South Africa is actually one of the most developed, if not the most developed country economically and otherwise on the African continent. And that cannot be an effort of only South Africans. It is an effort of people. We live in a kind of society where the world is becoming a global village. There is an integration of cultures, there's an integration of technologies, of knowledge, of creative powers harnessed from left, right, and center. Even the United States of America is an amalgam of so very many ideas, so very many races coming together to form what they call the strongest country in the world. So why South Africa, who incidentally, according to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, are called the Rainbow People of God, a country that has got, I think, 13 official languages, a country that has got tribes left, right, and center. Already by their nature, they are diverse. So I don't understand why they would actually bring this up again, because this is not the first time it is happening. In May 2008, 67 people were killed at the xenophobic attacks that began from the Alexandra Township. So it is sad. Whatever reasons there are, it is totally condemnable, and absolutely nothing on earth justifies it.
Okay, you've been to South Africa twice or more. I'm very sure of that. How would you describe the average South African?
Well, I haven't met very many average South Africans, but I've read more about them.
Okay.
South Africa is a country with an interesting history. The whole of the apartheid, the whole lot of people know Nelson Mandela, the guys who fought for apartheid to be abolished, the former president, the likes of Peter Botha, the guys who actually were the giants of apartheid, and a whole lot of other people, including F.W. de Klerk, the last apartheid president, who was a joint Nobel Prize winner at some point. So having come from such a history, having come from such a background, and incidentally, very many of the so-called strangers that they now want to leave the country, their countries sacrifice material resources, financial resources, also agitation, so that apartheid came to an end and there was some sort of equality in South Africa. I have met some of them, and the average South African, the few I have met, and the more I have had to read about, actually a happy-go-lucky set of people. But then we need to understand that there's a major divide between the guys in South Africa. A whole lot of that country is still white. That's why if you go to a place like Johannesburg, the places they call downtown, incidentally, are the developed areas. And the areas that are not quite developed, they now call it townships. Like the very popular Soweto, which is just an acronym for Southwest Township, Soweto. So I think one of the major effects of apartheid was that the blacks in South Africa, who incidentally have the numerical majority, actually were not exposed to as much education. They don't have as much global exposure. due to the oppression of the African-speaking whites, as it were. All of the people who gave their lives for apartheid to be abolished, including a very important date in South African history, which is still celebrated as a public holiday, June 16, Youth Day. There's a very important picture that was taken on that day, June 16, 1976, when a certain young man, Hector Peterson, was one of the very first that was killed because the students were protesting the colonial government then, the apartheid government then, saying that African should be the only medium of instruction in schools. And when the students spilled out on the street, that young man, Hector Peterson, was one of the very first persons to be killed. The sister, someone carried him, and there was a sister of his running beside him, and that particular photograph made global headlines and sparked a reaction left, right, and center. But then the summary is that many of the black South Africans actually have been educationally disadvantaged. There are few exceptions, but largely the whites, the African-speaking, the white community in South Africa are far more developed in very many ways. So this obviously has got an effect on the average black South African. Now, what does this do? It means that the economy, the blacks might control the politics, the African National Congress, the Jacob Malemas of this world, and the Zumas of this world might control the politics. But the economy of South Africa and a whole lot of other very important issues are still controlled by the blacks, are still controlled by the whites. There is that divide. I happen to have stayed in a hotel in South Africa during the 2010 World Cup, the Puta Hotel in Balalaika, Santon, and you rarely ever saw a black man there. They were all whites, left, right, and center. At some point, you wouldn't know whether you're in Africa or you're in Europe.
Okay.
And you go to South Africa, you go to where they call the richest square mile in the world, there in Santon, and you think that you're in the heart of the West. And so obviously, they do not get as much advantage. In jobs, good jobs, they do not get as much advantage in the educational sector, in the formal sector, it's still controlled by the whites. And now the blacks who automatically have been disenfranchised from the economic sphere in the country due to their inability now have to make do with some other jobs, some of which they're not very happy to do. And they now see blacks coming from Zimbabwe, coming from Nigeria, coming from Malawi, coming from Swaziland, to come and actually compete for these limited spaces. Not only are these spaces limited, but then I followed some of the debates. They say that the people who come from outside, the foreigners or strangers, as they choose to call them, actually take jobs that these South Africans don't want to take. For instance, a South African will want to take a job, and the person giving him the job wants to pay him 20 rand. And he says that's too small for him, and he goes up. And someone comes from Zimbabwe and takes that job for 15 rand, or takes it for 20 rand. And so obviously employers of labor go for cheap labor, and that means that a whole lot more people get in there and take jobs which they say are supposed to be theirs, but then which they refuse because they did not think they were being well paid. Then some of our Nigerian brothers, especially our brothers from the East, we already know about how the kind of spirit that they have, the enterprising spirit. They go in there and establish businesses, they open shops, they sell stuff, they do a whole lot of other things. They do what we call in Nigeria hustling, and they make a success of it. And the South Africans, the native South Africans now get jealous. And the Zulu king now comes to say strangers is a problem. But then I bet you, even if all the strangers, in quote, when they leave South Africa, it will make them any better. Because so very many of them, what do you do when somebody seems to have taken a better opportunity? You go and prepare yourself,
make yourself
to be able
better,
to match that person. You don't bring someone down to your level. You try to see if you can take yourself up to whatever level you've seen the person. So that's basically the issue. The government itself hasn't helped.
I was coming to the government because
yes.
I don't know if you heard this speech by Malema where he said the government didn't respond appropriately to the situation.
That's actually a fact. If that came from Malema, I think that's one of the best things I've seen in the past 5 years. The young man just goes around making trouble left, right, and center. It took, I think, 2 or 3 whole days before President Jacob Zuma eventually addressed the Congress about it, or even made a public speech about it. And it took almost a week of killings before the Zulu king, whose comments were originally said to have actually kickstarted this particular issue, to come and hold that conference he held on Monday, just 3 days ago, and telling people that's not what he meant. He said the government, trying to clarify something which already has led to. And also the culpability of the security agencies. There's some very disturbing stories. There's some very disturbing pictures
that
of people that are being lynched in full view of the security agencies. And you see the policemen just stand, they do nothing. Well, good enough, yesterday the South African government actually pulled out the troops and the South African armies on the street working with the police, and they've actually raided some of the townships and tried to see if they can get the people who are responsible for this arrested. But I think it is a reaction that came too late. and the calls that have been made for by some people for the international principle of reciprocity. If South Africans actually, Nigeria did that once. There was an aircraft that went into Johannesburg, and they said that they did not have the proper documentation, and they didn't let those people into the country. And the next thing we heard was that a South African plane actually was stopped in Lagos, and the guys were sent back. It is acceptable international law. I hear that that principle of reciprocity. If they're not giving us our due, if they're not respecting us, if they're not letting some other countries like Congo and Malawi have come out to say no, South Africans are welcome in this country. So they actually
think it's right? Do you think it's going to stem the tide?
It might not stem the tide, but then it is allowed under international law.
Okay.
If you do this to this person, if you do not respect someone from this country, that country also has the right to say we do also not respect.
Okay, as we get set to wrap this now, someone said, a certain South African celebrity said some time ago that Nigerians are actually annoying in South Africa, that they make life difficult for South Africans. Do you think is there a way a Nigerian who is staying in a foreign land can conduct himself to avoid this kind of situation?
There are Nigerians in every part of the world. You know, there are Nigerians in every country. In fact, there's that joke that if you go somewhere you don't find a Nigerian, you shouldn't stay. Obviously, that means you cannot thrive there. So whoever the celebrity was that said that they're a problem, because I'm not aware of any other country complaining about Nigerians, it obviously means there's something wrong with the South Africans themselves. You know, if Nigerians are enterprising, if Nigerians are hardworking, creative and innovative, and they come to your country and they were making an honest living, you're earning an honest living, I think the least you should do is also try and see if you can learn from them, or try to beat them at their game, and not try to get them to get out of place. Because the way the world is now, no particular country can survive without people coming from other countries. There are South Africans in other countries. There are South African businesses in Nigeria, just like they are in other places. So I think it's a bit unfair, whoever it is that made that statement. And it is comments like that, coming from celebrities, from people that people look up to, that they're a role model to people, that actually instigates these kind of issues. And the next thing you're going to hear, he'll come out and say he was misquoted. I think it's high time our celebrities, in quote, began to be held responsible for the kind of comments that they make that could actually lead to things like this.
Okay, so just to wrap this up now, we've not had an official response right now from the Nigerian government.
Well, the Senate of the
apart from the Senate, you've not had the president come out to condemn this. You've not had the Senate just said what they did.
Well, it is an arm of government. It is an arm of government. There's been a resolution by the Senate. I hear that the government should actually recall the ambassador to South Africa and also actually file before the International Criminal Court the Zulu King who had made these comments, which he has now come out to say that's not exactly what he meant. We also hear that the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Musili Obanikoro, well, if you don't know him, then you're not a Nigerian, has summoned the South African High Commissioner to Nigeria. Well, there seems to be quite a lot going on in the diplomatic circles. Good enough, I think so far we've not heard of any fatality concerning a Nigerian, despite the fact that a lot of Nigerians have lost businesses in the KwaZulu-Natal province and some parts of the townships, especially somewhere around on the outskirts of Johannesburg. And we're hoping this will come to an end once and for all. Because one of the major reasons why this always recurs is that it happens and we deal with it in our own way, in our own little way. Everybody goes home happy. A few years down the line, the same thing will happen. Because like I said, 67 people were killed in May of 2008. And since 1994, there have always been these issues of xenophobic attacks left, right, and center in South Africa. There has to be a fundamental problem that is not being dealt with. Maybe the South African security agencies themselves are complicit, obviously seen in the way that they stand by and let things like this happen. It's the story of Emmanuel Sitole, the Mozambican man who was killed in broad daylight just for being a South African. He was attacked and someone was vigilant enough to capture it on camera. And they stabbed him numerous times and they actually hit him over the head so very many times and he fell. And the photographer was trying to get him to hospital and people were standing by, nobody offering a helping hand. They took him to hospital, the first hospital rejected him, the second hospital declared him dead on arrival. And that's how he died, for being anything but a South African. And look at the gentleman, when they now looked at him, he had on his he had 3 armbands written Bafana Bafana for life. Meaning that even when he lived in South Africa, he was a rabid supporter of the football club of South Africa. And many of these people have lived in this country and they see themselves more as South Africans as people that come from the other countries. Unfortunately, you're trying to integrate yourself into a system that automatically rejects you, actually do not want to have you there. I think it's sad. The African Union, the global community should rise up and condemn, not just condemn and do something about this. If this had happened in the West, Charlie Hebdo, if this had happened in the United States of America, anywhere around the West, a whole lot of issues. There would have been marches, there would have been live coverage all over. But now, in very many cases, it's becoming just a footnote of global news. 147 people were killed in Garissa in Kenya, and there was no march. 6 people were killed in France, Charlie Hebdo, and the whole world was talking about it. There's something we're not doing right.
Raphael Edem, broadcaster and public affairs analyst, thank you very much for coming to Frontlines.
It's just my pleasure to be here.
And that's it on this edition of Frontlines. It came your way on 247 Niger TV. Remember, we are all Africans. Join everyone, every reasonable African, every reasonable citizen of the whole world to say no to xenophobia. Thank you. My name is Courage Mbon. I'll see you next week.
Frontlines, only on 247 Niger TV.